Welcome to my channel, Easy English Daily. Today we will talk about Putin's life and career. Why Putin's story isn't what you think. When most people think of Vladimir Putin, they picture power. A man in a suit, walking beside soldiers, riding a horse in the snow, speaking with quiet strength. But few know how his story began, and that beginning is nothing like the man you see today. Vladimir Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, now called St. Petersburg. His family lived in a small apartment in a building where many families shared the same kitchen and bathroom. They didn't have much money. Life was hard after World War II, and the city was still recovering. Putin's father was a factory worker. His mother cleaned hospital floors. They worked long hours and came home tired. The family didn't own a car or television. Sometimes they didn't even have hot water. As a child, Putin was small and quiet. He didn't talk much in school, and he wasn't the top student. But there was something different about him. He was serious, focused. When he wanted something, he didn't ask. He worked for it. One day, he watched a movie about spies. The men on screen wore suits, spoke many languages, and had secret missions. Putin didn't say a word to anyone. But inside, he made a decision. He wanted to be a spy too. At the age of 11, he went to a local KGB office and asked, "How do I become one of you?" The officer smiled and told him to do well in school, study law, and stay away from trouble. Putin nodded and went home. From that day on, his life had a direction. He began to train in judo. At first, he was weak. Other boys were stronger, but he kept showing up. He practiced every day, never missing a lesson. Over time, he became strong, fast, and focused. Judo taught him control. It taught him how to stay calm under pressure. And he used those lessons far beyond the mat. Putin's classmates remember him as quiet, but determined. He didn't care much about small talk. He cared about getting things done. If he had a goal, he followed it. Slowly, carefully, until he reached it. Years later, he studied law at Leningrad State University, just like the KGB officer had told him. He read books, learned foreign languages, and kept training. People still didn't notice him, but Putin didn't need attention. He was preparing for something bigger. By the time he graduated, he had everything the KGB wanted: discipline, loyalty, and silence. He joined the organization and began his career as an intelligence officer. He served in East Germany during the Cold War, watching the world from behind closed doors. And that's where his real story began. From a shared kitchen to the KGB, Vladimir Putin didn't grow up in a palace. He didn't have bodyguards, expensive clothes, or a private school education. He grew up in a shared apartment in a crowded building in Leningrad. His family lived in one small room. They shared the hallway, kitchen, and bathroom with several other families. Life was simple. Sometimes, life was cold. Putin's childhood was shaped by discipline and survival. His parents were strict and hard-working. They had lived through war. They didn't spoil him. They expected him to be tough, quiet, and smart. From a young age, he learned that respect had to be earned, and that it started with self-control. He was often a small boy in a big world. He got into street fights. He sometimes skipped class. But when he discovered judo, something changed. He found purpose. Judo wasn't just about fighting. It was about focus, timing, and balance. It helped him learn how to stay calm, how to wait, and how to act fast when the moment came. By the time he was a teenager, Putin wasn't just stronger. He was sharper. He spoke less, but thought more. He still wanted to become a spy, and he knew he had to follow a plan. So he improved his grades and applied to one of the best universities in the Soviet Union, Leningrad State University. There, he studied law. He wore simple clothes and kept to himself. He wasn't the most popular student, but professors remember him as serious, organized, and always prepared. He didn't show off. He didn't try to be a star. He was watching, listening, planning. During this time, he joined the Communist Party, not because he was deeply political, but because it was necessary to move forward. He followed the rules. He stayed out of trouble. He made connections. After graduation, Putin got what he had dreamed of since he was a boy, a place in the KGB, the Soviet Union's intelligence service. It was a secret world, full of rules and risks. But Putin fit in. He didn't ask questions. He followed orders. He worked quietly and effectively. He trained in spycraft, learning how to observe, how to blend in, how to gather information without being seen. He also learned German, which would later shape his first major mission. In the 1980s, he was sent to East Germany, a country still under communist rule. There, he worked in a small office in Dresden. His job wasn't like in the movies. He wasn't jumping between rooftops or wearing disguises. He spent most days reading files, writing reports, and building quiet connections, but it was serious work. He saw how governments operated behind the scenes. He saw what fear looked like, and he learned what power really meant. Not shouting, not showing off, but controlling the space around you without anyone noticing. Then, in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. Crowds filled the streets. People stormed buildings. Communism in Eastern Europe was collapsing. Putin was at his post in Dresden when protesters came to the KGB building. He called for help, but no one answered. Moscow had gone silent. For the first time, Putin felt what it meant when power disappears. He walked outside, faced the crowd, and told them in calm German that they couldn't come in. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just stood there, firm and quiet. The crowd left. Later, he said that day taught him something important. If you can't protect your position, you're nobody. When the Soviet Union fell, the KGB was disbanded. Putin returned to Russia, a country full of change, chaos, and uncertainty. But he didn't stop. He wasn't lost. He was ready for the next chapter. And this time, he wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was stepping into the light. The rise of a quiet politician. When Vladimir Putin returned to Russia in the early 1990s, the country he knew had changed. The Soviet Union had collapsed. The KGB no longer existed. The streets were filled with new businesses, rising crime, and political chaos. People were angry, confused, and uncertain about the future. The world was different, and so was Putin's role in it. He didn't go back into spying. Instead, he took a job at his old university, helping with international affairs. But that was only the beginning. He soon reconnected with an old teacher, Anatoly Sobchak, who had become the mayor of St. Petersburg. Sobchak was smart, bold, and open to reform. He needed someone he could trust, someone who was loyal, quiet, and efficient. He chose Putin. At first, Putin's job was behind the scenes. He helped with legal matters, trade, and foreign partnerships. He wasn't a man who gave speeches. He didn't seek the spotlight. But Sobchak noticed something. Whenever there was a tough problem, Putin solved it, calmly, quickly, without drama. While many politicians tried to impress the media or make big promises, Putin just did the work. That caught people's attention, not because he was loud, but because he was effective. In 1996, Sobchak lost his re-election. Putin could have disappeared from politics right then, but his quiet reputation had reached higher levels. He moved to Moscow and took a job in the presidential administration. Again, he didn't talk much, but he worked hard. 1 year later, he became the head of the FSB, the modern version of the KGB. It was a powerful position. He used it to reorganize the agency, cut out corruption, and bring order to the system. Within a short time, Putin was seen as a man who could handle responsibility and who didn't fear tough decisions. In 1999, President Boris Yeltsin was struggling. His health was failing. His approval ratings were low. He needed someone to take over, but not just anyone. He needed someone the people could trust, someone who would protect Yeltsin's legacy and keep the country stable, someone strong, smart, and loyal. That person was Vladimir Putin. Yeltsin appointed Putin as prime minister in August 1999. At that time, most Russians didn't know who he was, but that changed fast. In September, a series of apartment bombings rocked the country. Hundreds were killed. People were scared and angry. Putin acted fast. He blamed Chechen rebels and launched a military operation in the North Caucasus. His message was clear: Russia would be strong again. He spoke with firmness. He showed no hesitation. People liked that. Suddenly, his popularity soared. On New Year's Eve 1999, Yeltsin shocked the nation by stepping down. In his speech, he said, "I am giving this country to a man who can make it strong again." That man was Vladimir Putin. At first, he was acting president, but just 3 months later, he won the election with over 50% of the vote. He wasn't famous like other candidates. He wasn't charming, but he was serious, disciplined, and after years of chaos, Russians were ready for someone like that. As president, Putin moved quickly. He centralized power, restructured the government, and reasserted control over the country's regions. He went after oligarchs, super-rich businessmen who had taken over much of Russia's economy in the 1990s. Some of them lost their companies. Others left the country. A few went to jail. To Putin, it wasn't just about money. It was about order, about loyalty, about sending a message. In the new Russia, no one was above the state. He also brought back national pride. He raised the Russian flag high again, supported the military, and used energy exports, oil and gas, to grow the economy. Streets were cleaner. Salaries improved. Many people felt life was getting better, but not everyone was happy. Independent media started to disappear. Critics were watched, silenced, or forced out. Some called it security. Others called it control. But again, Putin didn't explain much. He just acted, and people followed. By 2004, he won re-election easily. His image grew, strong, serious, fearless. In the West, people debated whether he was a democrat or a dictator. But in Russia, many saw him as the man who brought back dignity and direction. One thing was clear: the quiet man from a shared apartment in Leningrad had become the most powerful figure in the country, and he was just getting started. The president who changed Russia. By the time Vladimir Putin entered his second term as president in 2004, he had already reshaped Russia's leadership. But now, he wanted to reshape Russia itself, from the economy and media to the country's role on the world stage. He believed that Russia had been humiliated in the 1990s. It was time, he said, to bring back its strength and pride. One of his first major moves was to regain control over the country's wealth. In the 1990s, a small group of businessmen, called oligarchs, had taken control of large industries, especially oil and gas. These men became extremely rich, while most Russians remained poor. Putin believed this was dangerous. The economy couldn't be run by a few private hands, so he took action. He went after the biggest oligarchs. Some were forced to sell their companies. Others left the country. One, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, was arrested and sent to prison. Critics said Putin was silencing his opponents. Supporters said he was cleaning up corruption. Either way, Putin made it clear, no one was above the state. At the same time, Putin used Russia's energy to grow its influence. Russia had vast reserves of oil and natural gas. Under his leadership, the state took more control over these resources. State-run companies like Gazprom and Rosneft grew stronger. Energy became not just a source of income, but a tool of diplomacy. Countries that depended on Russian gas had to listen to Moscow. Domestically, Putin focused on stability. The wild, lawless 1990s were over. The streets were safer. The economy was growing. Salaries increased. For many ordinary Russians, life was better, and they gave Putin credit for that. He also launched big projects to boost national pride, restoring old churches, improving the military, and hosting global events. In 2007, Russia won the bid to host the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. It was a huge moment. Putin wanted to show that Russia was not just strong again, it was back on the world stage. But with strength came control. The media landscape began to change. Independent TV stations were shut down or taken over. Journalists who criticized the government faced pressure, or worse. Some were attacked. A few were killed. The Kremlin said it wasn't involved. But the message was clear. Speak carefully. Non-government organizations were labeled as foreign agents if they received money from abroad. Protests were allowed, but only under tight rules. New laws gave the government more power to watch the internet, track people's activities, and silence voices they didn't trust. To the West, this looked like a turn toward authoritarianism. But in Russia, many saw it differently. After years of chaos, they valued order. They liked having a strong leader, someone who could say, "I'm in control." Then came 2008. According to the Constitution, Putin couldn't serve more than 2 consecutive terms, so he stepped aside, but not really. He supported his friend and ally Dmitry Medvedev for president. Medvedev won. Putin became prime minister. But everyone knew who still held the real power. In 2012, Putin returned to the presidency. This time, the rules had changed. Terms were now 6 years instead of 4. Protests broke out in Moscow. People shouted, "Russia without Putin." They believed the election wasn't fair. But Putin didn't back down. His next years in office were filled with bold moves. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, a region that had been part of Ukraine. The move shocked the world. Putin said it was protecting Russian speakers and correcting a historic mistake. Most Western countries called it illegal. They placed sanctions on Russia. The economy suffered, but inside Russia, Putin's popularity soared. He was seen as a defender of the Russian people, a leader who stood up to the West. someone who wouldn't be pushed around. In Syria, he supported the government of Bashar al-Assad, using airstrikes and military advisors. While Western powers debated, Russia acted. It was another signal. Russia was a major player again. But not everything went smoothly. The economy faced slow growth. Young people were leaving. Political opposition remained weak, but present. One of Putin's strongest critics, Alexei Navalny, was poisoned in 2020. The Kremlin denied involvement, but the world watched closely. Still, Putin's control remained firm. He changed the constitution in 2020, allowing him to stay in power until 2036 if he chooses to run. Some called it a power grab. Others said it ensured stability. After more than 2 decades in power, Vladimir Putin had changed Russia deeply. He rebuilt its image, reclaimed its influence, and left his mark on every part of national life, from business and law to culture and war. For better or worse, one thing was clear. Putin wasn't just leading Russia. He had become part of what Russia was. What his journey teaches us. Vladimir Putin's story is not simple. It's not clean. It's not without controversy. But it is powerful and full of lessons. He was not born rich. He didn't grow up in a palace. He grew up in a tiny shared apartment in a cold city, raised by parents who had survived war. His childhood taught him to be tough, quiet, observant. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he was always watching. He didn't dream of being a celebrity or a businessman. He dreamed of something few boys think about, being a spy. And when he had that dream, he didn't just talk about it. He made a plan. He studied law. He trained his body and mind through judo. He followed the steps, patiently, carefully. His journey teaches us that not all success begins with talent or money. Sometimes it begins with a quiet decision and a long commitment to discipline. Putin moved through life with purpose. Whether it was in the KGB or city government, he never rushed. He never demanded attention, but he earned respect by getting results. While others spoke, he acted. That became his style. Low voice, sharp moves, clear outcomes. And when opportunity came, he was ready. When Yeltsin chose him as successor, many didn't understand why. But Yeltsin saw what others missed. Someone who was loyal, organized, and fearless. Putin didn't try to become president. He didn't campaign like others. But when the job came to him, he took it with full force. As a leader, he didn't try to please everyone. He didn't always explain his choices, but he made them with confidence. For some, this was strength. For others, it was control. But it always sent a message. Putin doesn't follow, he leads. His story also teaches us about strategy. Putin didn't act with emotion. He acted with calculation. He built systems, strengthened the state, controlled resources, reclaimed power for Russia. He played the long game, sometimes waiting years before making a move. In leadership, this kind of patience is rare and powerful. Another lesson? Identity matters. Putin believed that Russia had lost its sense of self after the fall of the Soviet Union. He didn't just want to rebuild the economy. He wanted to rebuild confidence, national pride, the feeling that Russia was a great nation again. Through speeches, symbols, and strong moves, he gave Russians something many felt was missing: direction. That doesn't mean every choice was right. But it shows that leadership isn't only about laws. It's about meaning, purpose, story, and perhaps the biggest lesson: power reveals character. The longer Putin stayed in power, the more the world saw who he really was. He could be calm and thoughtful. He could also be harsh and unbending. He allowed less freedom. He demanded more loyalty. Some praised him, others feared him, but no one ignored him. Whether you agree with his politics or not, one truth remains. Vladimir Putin shaped the course of modern Russia. He brought stability to a broken system. He also limited voices that challenged him. He expanded influence abroad and tightened control at home. So what does his journey teach us? That ambition without patience leads nowhere. That discipline is stronger than noise. That power is a mirror. It shows who we really are. And that leadership, at its core, is about decisions. Every day, big or small. For those learning English, his story gives more than vocabulary. It gives perspective. For those learning to lead, it offers questions, not just answers. Should a leader seek control or trust? Should strength be silent or shared? And in a changing world, how much power is too much? These are the questions Putin's story leaves behind. What will you do with them?